Welcome aboard the Athletics Can't Wait Jets podcast, your nonstop shop for all things Jets with Tim McMaster, Zach Rosenblatt, and Marissa Dunn.
Can't wait!
Just when we thought there was something to look forward to over the season's final month, it all goes up in smoke in Miami. The Jets will miss the playoffs for the 13th straight season. We'll discuss that, what it means for Robert Saleh, what it means for Joe Douglas and the rest of this organization. Also, continuing our holiday push for 5 stars. So get your 5 stars reviews in on Apple. Say something nice, say something funny, say whatever you want. Just give it 5-star reviews. We're going to read those, I think, next week. Zach, how are you doing? How was Miami?
So Samantha came out with me because, you know, when you plan the Miami trip in December, you hope for good weather, and then it rained almost not the entire weekend, but Friday and Saturday. We spent yesterday going around town a little bit, and she got to be on her own on Sunday. But the weather was very disappointing because I usually very much look forward to that trip this time of the year. But you know, at least we got to see a good football. Oh wait, never mind.
So this just came into the chat. If you're checking us out live on YouTube, we appreciate that, from Vince Longto. Do you guys ever pity folks like us who follow this team for free? LOL. Vince, I don't know how long you've been listening to this show, but that's basically what we're based on is feeling bad for the fans who cover this team for free. And that's why we try to be here and let people vent and get in that comment section and complain and all that stuff and bring you the information that we have. But absolutely, we feel terrible for all the listeners that watch this team when things are bad. And we kind of celebrate with you when things are good too. So that's all part of the fun here of the Can't Wait podcast. All right, let's jump into things. Obviously, Zach, 30-0. It wasn't pretty. You could say it was embarrassing, which is interesting because last Friday on the show, it was the morning after the Thursday night football game. The Chargers embarrassed by the Raiders, and we knew Brandon Staley was on the clock at that point. Later that day, he was let go along with the general manager for LA. And we talked about the fact that, oh yeah, that's what it looks like when a coach loses the locker room. The Jets aren't there. We said the Jets aren't there yet. Robert Saleh has done a good job. Jeff Ulbrich has done a good job of keeping this defense locked in. And this team has continued to play hard. And then 2 days later, we get that performance in Miami. So, I mean, we're not on the clock here waiting, but things have changed in less than a week since we last did this podcast, as far as I think how Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas, not how they're viewed, but I think how they're viewed as far as next season goes.
Yeah, just about every way, that performance was damning for Robert Saleh, I think in particular, because, you know, you can talk about talent on the roster constructed, and we'll get into that with Joe Douglas because it's obviously a big part of this, but effort and, you know, pride, like all that stuff, like they did not play like a team that had much pride or, you know, energy or effort. And or it didn't seem like there was a plan, I should say. I don't even want to put it entirely on the players, frankly. I don't think they played great. And I think even DJ Reed admitted this, and we'll get into the comments from the locker room. Like the effort definitely went down as the game went on, but it didn't seem like the coaches planned them for anything that happened on Sunday. I don't know what they did over the last week. None of the momentum they had in the second half against Texans carried over. It was as if that week never happened. And it's a very poor reflection on the head coach in particular, also the offensive coordinator, but there's only so many more ways we can criticize Nathaniel Hackett. Like Robert Saleh is the one running this team, and his team did not look prepared for that game. And that's not the first time it's felt like that. They're the worst first quarter team in the NFL. When you're bad in the first quarter, that is a sign of coaching because the first 15 plays are scripted. You go over them all week. Robert Saleh is very adamant that he likes to hand the keys off to the offensive and defensive and special teams coordinators. But like, you're the head coach. If the offense is this bad, you have to step in. And he's letting Nathaniel Hackett run this offense into the ground, and frankly, the team into the ground to a degree. So I get the impression that Saleh and this regime is still operating under the assumption that they're returning. I think they still have belief and confidence in that. And I think that's why you've seen, I mean, I think some of Saleh's comments have been, frankly, like baffling to me as a head coach. You know, after the game, he pretty much blamed the offensive line, which you don't really see head coaches do that. Usually you want to whether you believe it or not, you need to go to that podium and say, this is on me. I'm the one that runs this team. We were not prepared to play today. And instead he kept saying, one of the first question was that an embarrassing performance? He says, yeah, when you get beat up front like that. Yeah, it's not great. Like, and he kept alluding to the offensive line. Like that just blew my mind. And that was that. And then the comments in the locker room immediately after that were alarming to me. And again, the sign of I don't know that the locker room is fractured or that he has lost it 100% completely, but it's heading in that direction. I alluded to this in my story after the game. Like Brandon Staley, I think we talked about this the other day. He had a comment like a couple weeks before he was fired, like, you'll know the locker room has been lost or whatever the quote was when we get blown out of the building. And then they were blown out of the building 2 weeks later. He was fired the next day. I don't know what it would take for Saleh to get fired. I do know that the Washington Commanders are a very bad football team with their coaching staff on the way out. And if they lose to Washington on Sunday, I do not see a scenario where he survives. I just can't see any way that Woody Johnson would be okay with the way they're being talked about. I know Woody and his family reads social media and sees the things that are being said, that the Jets are a laughingstock again. And this will be the second straight year that a Robert Saleh coach team has gotten worse as the season has progressed, not better. They've been at their best at the beginning of the season and they get worse at the end. And that is not a good sign. Maybe it's something they're doing in training camp or I don't know what it is, but last year we lauded him for keeping everything together when there was a lot of stuff, even through that losing streak. I thought he did a good job. I have some opinions on why maybe that has been lost. I won't necessarily say all of them right now. I'll save that for a later date. But I don't know that the message is still resonating the way it used to. And we'll find out. I think when a team is eliminated from the playoffs a few games before the end of the season, you really find out how committed this group is to that coach, because it's going to be effort-based. It's going to be guys, all of a sudden, if they start popping up in the injury report and they don't want to play and things like that, like you're going to kind of see that this group doesn't really want to go and fight for their coach. And I think that's what we're going to learn over the next 3 weeks. I don't think Saleh's fired right now. I do think he can still get to the end of the season, get into next season. And I think they can all promote the idea that with Aaron Rodgers there, we're going to be better. I think he's promoting that. I think he believes that. I think he believes that they're a team that would have won a lot more games with him. And, he's probably right. But ultimately, like, you coach the guys that you have. And, we obviously talked to Marissa a lot about the Browns. I think they're the best example of why
I was going to bring that up next. Yep.
Why it's kind of BS to use the excuses of the O-line, the quarterback. Like the Browns have dealt with all of that. Maybe not. So the offensive line conversation is complicated. So the Browns' base offensive line is better. That, like, the talent is significantly better than the Jets had before everybody got hurt. But the Browns' great offensive line got hurt, and their backups are still doing their job. They've played 4 quarterbacks this year, including P.J. Walker, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Joe Flacco, and they're 9-5. But even beyond the Browns, who are
no
a good
Chubb either.
Yeah, no Nick Chubb, and they're a good comparison because they also have a great defense, by the way, even better than the Jets. But even beyond them, you look at the Colts, Gardner Minshew's, Anthony Richardson goes down at the beginning of the year, Gardner Minshew steps in. I don't think they have a great front, or at least they haven't in the last few years. They're in playoff contention. The Vikings have been an absolute, turnstile of guys at quarterback. Josh Dobbs looked good for a bit, then he left, and Nick Mullins had one of the worst interceptions I've ever seen the other day, and they still won. Justin Jefferson's missed most of the year. They're in playoff contention. And there's one other team I'm blanking on. Bengals. Yeah, Bengals lost Joe Burrow. He's missed a bunch of games this year. I can't remember how many. Maybe 5, something like that. And Jake Browning, 4-1. The Bengals made the Super Bowl with a bad offensive line. And so I don't know. The excuses are the thing that, like, bugs me the most. Like, you're not the first team to lose guys. And I get 4 plays into the season is a unique circumstance, and they put everything they had into Rodgers. But it just seems like they've been resigned to their fate since then. And, they were able to pull out some wins because of their defense with that Bills game and the Eagles game, which are their 2 best wins, maybe of the Saleh era, if you consider the circumstances. But it just seems like they just washed away this year and focused on next year, whether they want to admit it or not. And I think that in particular is probably the thing that some guys in the locker room would probably not be happy about, I would say.
Yeah, and the thing that I continue to not understand is, okay, that's fine that your plan going into the season, I think, was Aaron Rodgers is going to be our starter and Zach Wilson is going to watch him all year long and improve by watching and not playing and learning from a Hall of Fame quarterback. That's fine. But when the quarterback gets hurt on the fourth play of the game, that's when you have to change that plan, unless you're resigned to the season being a failure. Like, you have to, what Zach Wilson is. You told the world what you think of Zach Wilson before this all started. So the moment, like, it's probably different if Aaron Rodgers goes down in week 10, right? Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Like, the Jets are 6-3, week 10, Aaron Rodgers goes down. Zach Wilson's been watching for 10 weeks. It's late in the game to bring in someone else. Okay, we'll see what happens. But when it happens on the fourth play of the game, and you've told the world that you don't believe in this number 2 overall pick, backup quarterback, there were so many options available. And we've seen them because they've all been picked up since then by other teams with,
varying results.
That's the word I was looking for. Varying results, right? Like, and I think Connor said it, like, as good as Joe Flacco has looked for the Browns the last couple weeks, how would Joe Flacco look behind this Jets offensive line? Probably awful, but there are other options available as well. And they just didn't go with any of them. And that's more on Douglas than Saleh, but it's just inexcusable.
Yeah. Well, and that's the Douglas part. Maybe this is how he transitioned to the Douglas part. Because they can say that the offensive line has been decimated, but you look at it and the left tackle and left guard are guys that started in week 1. And the center is a guy you drafted in the second round. So 3 out of the 5 guys are guys that are supposed to be cornerstones of your offensive line. The fact that they aren't, or, if you don't believe in them, and Mekhi Becton was absolutely terrible on Sunday. Like, maybe his worst game. I think he has allowed 11 sacks this season. That was a fun story for a little bit, but I think it's pretty clear he's kind of over, outmatched at left tackle. But that's on a number 1 talent evaluation and development. And clearly, maybe Keith Carter wasn't the solution. I don't know. He's had a tough hand dealt to him. And Billy Turner, by the way, was the right tackle. That's who they signed to be the swing tackle. So you signed a swing tackle knowing there's a possibility he might have to start. And that was a bad move. And so, I'm not going to blame Jake Hansen for not being ready because he's a practice squad guy who nobody heard of a few weeks ago. But, like, you can't say you don't have the players, because these are the players that you guys invested in and you guys hyped up all offseason. And you spent $44 million on Allen Lazard, and he's been one of the worst receivers in the NFL. You invested in these tight ends. You signed Dalvin Cook to a $7 million contract. Like, these are all the players that you guys brought in, and you thought that this was the group that was going to get you to the promised land, whether I was with Rodgers or not. And so the fact that you can't figure out how to use any of them just shows that there was at some point there was a drop in miscommunication, or everybody just signed these guys and figured, all right, well, Aaron Rodgers will figure it out. Like, we don't need to come up with our own plan for them, because they didn't have a plan for Dalvin Cook. Clearly they didn't. Maybe they thought they were going to get more out of Allen Lazard. I know they can say that they thought they were going to have Corey Davis, but early in the offseason, they were planning on cutting him, and then they didn't. And so, this is Joe Douglas deserves, if not half of the pie of the blame, at least a significant portion of it. Like, he absolutely failed this offseason to build a roster that can compete. And I'm not even saying make the playoffs. Like, the fact they're not even competing is the worst part. Like, I think when you lost Rodgers, I think it was acceptable. I think everybody would have been like, okay, they didn't make the playoffs, but at least they were competing at the end of the season. At least they won 7, 8, 9 games, whatever it is. And this does not look like even the games that some of the games they've won, it's hard to even say that they deserved it. And, you win the games you win. But that Giants game in particular is one you look at where it's like they barely beat a team with negative passing yards. So I just think it's been a poor reflection of the coaching staff this year. And they thought that Rodgers would just fix all their ails and he'd make their life a lot easier. And then he was gone, and they didn't have a backup plan in any way, and they didn't come up with a backup plan since then. And that's on Joe Douglas for his biggest fault this entire year, no matter what you want to say about his offseason, which was pretty bad top to bottom. The biggest mistake he made was not going to get a quarterback after Aaron Rodgers got hurt. Like, I think everybody agrees with that. They probably would agree in the building. Just deciding that they were going to get a mulligan this year was a wild miscalculation in terms of how that would be perceived both internally and externally.
One more thing I wanted to touch on before we move on to the quarterbacks, and that is the fact that Nathaniel Hackett is still calling plays for this team. Because now this didn't necessarily play out, But
yeah.
the Philadelphia Eagles were 10-3 heading into the weekend. Considered a Super Bowl contender, even though they had struggled a little bit the last couple of weeks. But because their defense had struggled at times this year, giving up 30 points in 3 straight games heading into last night, they actually made the change at play caller. Now, they didn't change the defensive coordinator. Desai is still the defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
But they said, you know what? These plays, maybe he's running a good ship, but these plays on game day aren't working out. And so Matt Patricia is going to take over the play calling. Now, they lost again last night. So say what you will about that. But they, on a good team that is playoff bound, they said something's not right. It needs to be fixed. And this team just refuses to do that. And it's something we brought up. You don't have to not make Nathaniel Hackett the offensive coordinator. He can stay the offensive coordinator, find someone else to call the plays because they're not working. And that's what happened in Green Bay. He wasn't the play caller with Aaron Rodgers for the Packers. He was the offensive coordinator. That is the other thing that I just can't wrap my head around, Zach, how this is still a thing at this point.
Hackett's inability to adjust or do anything creative, like they celebrated the Broncos game like they won the Super Bowl, even though they didn't have a great game plan that day. It's the only 2 games this year where he's had a creative play calling situation was the Chiefs game and the Texans game. And he comes out of the Texans game and he just puts together an absolute dud of a game plan against the Dolphins. Like, it was frankly how do you not Garrett? So we haven't gotten to the locker room stuff yet. Garrett Wilson has shown over and over again how good he is, and they have no idea how to scheme him open. They do not get him, move him in motion. Like, does Nathaniel Hackett know how to do these things? Like, there's no evidence that he does based on how they've called plays. Like, Garrett Wilson is watching across the field, and the Dolphins are scheming Jalen Waddle open against maybe the best cornerback room in the NFL. You know, he did burn DJ Reed on the one, which doesn't happen very often. But anyway, we see all these teams that get their receivers the ball. They find a way to do it. And I get the offensive line was as bad as I can remember. There was plays where Zach Wilson was in there. We haven't even touched on Zach Wilson yet. We will. Where he was, the entire defensive line was on him pretty quickly. But that's why you design plays to get Garrett Wilson the ball. That's why you design plays where the running back or an extra blocker is out there to help Mekhi Becton when he's struggling. You chip a guy, whatever it is. Like, he just does not adjust. He does not put them in position to succeed, even if it's not there. And it's just maddening. And they're not going to make a change because they're scared of, the real person who's running this team. And it's offensive to watch this offense, frankly. And I feel bad for Jets fans because they've had some of the worst offenses in the league for a long time. This might be the worst of them, and that's really saying something. I think statistically they have like a worse EPA, and I think they're maybe even scoring fewer offensive points per game than during the Adam Gase era. I think Robert Saleh has had 3 of the 5 worst yardage games in his tenure. It's with 2 different offensive coordinators, but 3 of the 5 worst yardage games in his tenure in Jets history. And Adam Gase never had a yardage game as low as the other day against the Dolphins. And so the offense is worse than it was with Adam Gase. And that's frankly inexcusable. And I don't know what those coach meetings are looking like. I don't know if Saleh's calling him out or asking him why he's not doing certain things, but they do not change every week. It's the same thing all the time. And I don't have much else to say about it other than I don't know. How does this guy have this job still? I don't know.
You mentioned the locker room. Let's talk about that a little bit. Who stood out to you the most as far as comments that, I guess the way to look at it is comments that differed from what we've gotten used to this season, right? Like, you kind of know what you're going to get when you go to different players in the locker room after a game, right? Like, Garrett Wilson's always there, always frustrated. But like, what changed in your mind during this post-game locker room because you talked about it in your story on The Athletic?
Yeah, Alan Lazard had one of the most damning quotes, though I think a lot of people, maybe even internally, were offended that he was the one saying it out of all people, where he said we were out-efforted and out-schemed. But it's hard to argue with him. And then, if he was the only one that had said something like that, then you would have been like, okay, it's just Alan Lazard being frustrated because he doesn't play or get the ball ever. But then, I asked Garrett Wilson directly if he agreed, and he said, yeah, if Allen said it, sure. And then DJ Reed, who can't help but be honest, basically his quote, like somebody asked if they felt like the team fought the whole way through, and he said, to be honest, up until the midway through the third quarter, I thought we did, and then from then on, it seemed like you could see on everybody's face how depressed and annoyed they were, and I didn't really like the effort the rest of the way. And those are the kind of quotes when as I like to say, when they start saying the quiet part out loud, that's the first sign of unrest, the first sign that a team is turning on their coach. And I'm not saying that they have yet, but it is not a good sign for the rest of the way, and it's not a good sign for Robert Saleh as like the future leader of this team if he can't get his guys to even try at the end of the season. And so, like I said, the next 3 games, especially against Washington, which is a bad football team, this is going to be telling of how this team feels about him, frankly. If they can't go out and beat a bad team, then I don't really know what else I have to say about him.
Lou Giordano in the chat says, how close are we to Garrett pulling an Elijah Moore, forcing his way off the team? Is the promise of playing with Rodgers next season enough to keep him here? You can see him continuing to talk to Rodgers on the sideline, which would
he was getting pretty animated. Yeah. I think Garrett is. I've raved about him on here. I think he's a genuinely good. He even had some quotes. So it's been fascinating seeing him in these post games because there's some where he's just like dismayed and like speaking quietly, and then there's others where like this one he was legit angry, and he still was saying like somebody was about to ask him about how he had his first target in the third quarter and he cut him off, and he's like, I'm aware. He said it. He didn't say it like an ass, but and then the rest of the question was said, and he's like, I don't know what I have to do. Maybe I need to do something different in meetings. Maybe I need to be more attentive in practice. Like he's trying to put it on himself, which I think there's some people in that building that could learn a lesson from him.
He's trying to it sounded like he wanted to be the offensive coordinator in those quotes. I'll scheme something up for myself. Yeah. I'll do it.
Yeah. I can't only say it so many ways. I feel bad for him. I don't think he's going to demand a trade. I do think he's a loyal person. I think he has a great head on his shoulders. Not to say him demanding a trade wouldn't be warranted. I don't think we've quite reached that. I think the prospect of playing with Aaron next year maybe helps him, but it'll be his 3rd year next year. He'll be up for a new contract after that year. They're running out of time to prove to this guy that he should be here long term, and it's a shame. Like they're wasting a generational wide receiver talent, I think. And you can just see it on his face and the way he wears his heart on his sleeve. I think the Jets have tried to, keep him from mouthing off like media wise, and he's done a really good job of like not, I think last year he was a little more harsh in his comments at times. And he's having a hard time like biting his tongue, and I understand it. So if you're going to do anything these last 3 games, feed Garrett Wilson the ball 1,000,000 times. Like whatever you have to do, scheme the entire offense around getting Garrett Wilson the ball. Whatever else happens around him, whatever. Get Garrett Wilson the ball a lot. Get this kid happy. And we'll get into like maybe who's throwing him the ball and how that'll factor in. But it's you really feel for him for sure.
Let's transition to the quarterback position, which is, as it has been, a mess, but different this week. It always seems to be a little different. Zach, the whole situation was odd, but this team, 103 total yards of offense, 23 rushing. The situation around Zach leaving the game, initially it was said on the broadcast or CBS, it was dehydration. Then it was said it was a head injury, but not a concussion. Then finally it was said that it was a concussion. Now he's obviously in concussion protocols. It was all very confusing. And to kind of shed some light on this, Zach's mom took to social media, I think, to kind of try to explain what was going on. So this is the latest from Zach's mom on social media saying what's going on with him right now, which doesn't sound very good.
So I did want to take a second to thank everybody for your kind messages and your prayers. Yesterday was a little bit rough. Zach took some really, really big hits, and he fought through it and really tried to just stay out on the field. He didn't want to go off. He didn't want to stop playing. So he didn't really tell the sideline, the coaches, the trainers how he was really feeling. And he tried to just fight through it and keep going, and so he could be out there for his guys. And then finally, after one more blow to the head, he really started having problems with blurred vision and his depth perception. And he started really worrying that he was actually going to hurt his team if he stayed out there, because his vision was not right, and you can't play like that. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the prayers. We feel you, we see you, and we are so grateful. Take us.
We need Marissa back.
Where's Marissa?
Soon.
So first of all, that sounds terrible, obviously, and hopefully Zach is feeling better as the week goes on, and whether or not it seems like he's not going to be able to play come this week. I would just imagine concussion protocols, it usually takes more than a week, especially if not only is he in protocols, but he's actually feeling those symptoms that his mom just talked about. But beyond that, Zach, how does the communication get, like, whose fault is this that it was just so confusing? Is it the team? Is it the broadcast for kind of having wrong information out there? Like, I don't know where it went wrong, but these things only seem to happen to the Jets.
As I always say, every week you see some shit you've never seen before. That's always what's going to happen with the Jets. Yeah, it was. So Jeff Darlington from ESPN was doing a lot of the reporting. Some of it was via the broadcast, but Jeff Darlington was the one that reported via Jets PR, is how he cited it, that he had a head injury, but was not necessarily in concussion protocol. Like, that was a specific thing. And I think he even followed up to make sure. And then everybody on social media is speculating that Zach decided he didn't want to play again, which, based on if what his mom said is true, and I have no reason to believe it's not. Like, the Jets haven't really been very giving of the information going on here, so this is all we have to go on. He had a concussion the whole time, but I don't know. And Saleh said that there was a spotter that called him out, and that's why he had to retreat to the locker room and get checked. But if he wasn't in concussion protocol, then, like, nobody seems to really have answers. And so I don't really know what happened. It was a very strange sequence. But yeah, to your point, like, based on how the NFL has done concussions this year, I guess if he's in concussion protocol, I guess that means he has one. So yeah, usually the guys have missed the week after that every single time. And I do wonder how much Zach is going to want to rush back in behind this offensive line, coming off concussion with his future on the line. And so I do wonder if we've seen the last of him. I can't say for sure that we have, but yeah, I'd be surprised if he played this week at this point. And that gets into the question of who's going to be playing next. And I think I have a pretty good idea who plays on Sunday. The last 2 weeks are a conversation about, the big man.
Well, let's start with Sunday. And, it seems Trevor Siemian, I mean, Saleh said that. So it's pretty clear that it's not going to be Aaron Rodgers on Sunday, which always made sense, because then you have the Thursday night game. And that seems like you're asking for trouble bringing Rodgers back for Sunday, Thursday. But we keep going back to the Commanders game and playing Washington, and this being a must win for this coaching staff and front office. And suddenly you're going into a must game with Trevor Siemian at quarterback. Yikes.
Yeah, it's that's why I'm a little concerned about their ability to even beat the Washington, frankly. I just want to say, unrelated, but Boy Green just shouted out my hoodie. Samantha, I told her that somebody had a comment earlier about we should talk about her more than the Jets. And then she came on and she criticized my outfit. She said I need to let her pick my outfit. So if somebody likes it, somebody complimented my hat earlier, so I think I did okay. But yeah, Trevor Siemian. I mean, he hasn't looked very good in these 2 games that he's played. To be frank, like, I don't really have much. I frankly didn't watch a lot of his throws the other day because the game was already out of hand, and Connor and I went down to the locker room area pretty early, and we saw Zach Wilson going into the X-ray room because we wanted to see what was going on down there, and we wanted to see guys walking in the locker room. Trevor Siemian's the quarterback. This offense, which is already one of the worst in the league, I can't see it being much better unless he somehow pulls something out of his butt to go off against Washington, which he wouldn't be the first guy to do that, because the Giants, no matter who their quarterback, it seems like, tend to go off against Washington. Daniel Jones has like 9 of his career, like 12 wins or however many wins he has his career. Most of them are against Washington. So we'll see. But assuming Rodgers isn't active on Sunday, it would be Siemian, and then Brett Ripien would be the backup, which, exciting stuff. I know that's really, I'm sure you guys are tripping over yourselves to try and go to that game on Sunday, on Christmas Eve.
Especially when I was saying last week how excited I was to see the last month of Zach Wilson coming off the Texans game.
Yeah.
And now it's just the complete opposite.
That's the season in a nutshell, though, right? It's just like depressing. Anytime there's like a little glimmer of like, oh, maybe there's something interesting here, just like the worst thing possible happens the next week. It's every time. Like it's just been a little bit up, one step forward, and like 10 steps backward each time. And it's for as weird as last year was, this has been one of the craziest football seasons I've ever covered, and not like in a good way.
We will learn more about Rodgers this week, though, right? The deadline is there to make him active, not to play, but to actually
Wednesday.
make him active is Wednesday.
Yeah. So I would think they activate him, and that doesn't necessarily mean he'd play at all this season necessarily. I just think if he's cleared, even if he's not necessarily, if he's cleared for 11 on 11, which I think all the reporting has been he will be this week, this at least allows you to let him practice with the team for the next 3 weeks, get some reps, and then, and maybe this is how we transition into the Rodgers thing. Because Saleh had a comment about him. Like I wouldn't say it's 0% that he plays, but the impression I get is that he won't, especially because they were eliminated and it's not worth the risk. But I know for fairly certain that Aaron Rodgers does want to play, 100% wants to play, because I think a lot of this is he's worked really hard to come back, and now it's like all for naught in a lot of ways. So I think he wants to prove that he did it. I heard them talking on Good Morning Football this morning how they're like, if Rodgers comes back and plays a game, maybe he should be comeback player of the year for a comeback within the same season. But yeah, so I don't think he's going to play. I've been saying that probably longer than most people. I've been skeptical because of the risk. I think in the last couple of weeks, especially at that Texans win, I'm like, shoot, if they upset the Dolphins, I think he's coming back. And then they got absolutely destroyed. So I think it's a very, very small chance, a non-zero chance that he comes back is how I'd phrase it, but I don't see it happening. But you should play what Robert Saleh said because it's relevant.
Yeah, this was Saleh on the Michael
Green,
Kay show on ESPN Radio. He was basically asked like, hey, man, the offensive line was really abysmal. Like, how do you put Aaron Rodgers back there? And Saleh's reaction is really telling at this point. This was actually, we should give Boy Green a little credit for stealing it from his Twitter.
But Robert, along those lines, and again, it's a hypothetical possibly, but do you think that Aaron at this stage of not playing football for 3 months and your most mobile and elusive quarterback couldn't finish the game yesterday, can Aaron go out there and protect himself behind this offensive line right now?
Shoot, he's a Hall of Famer. I'm sure he'd be able to figure it out.
But Robert, along those lines, and again,
there's a few things. There's a very short answer. But I think you can like
that uncomfortable laugh laugh at the end, like just oh my god.
Yeah. So there's the uncomfortable laugh at the end, which is when which you could talk to like experts and they will tell you, right, that like that's what people do when they're very unsure of what they're saying or they're nervous. That's like a clear reaction.
Yeah.
He starts the answer with which is like those same people would tell you that's when you don't know what to say, right?
Because you're buying yourself time is the idea. Yeah.
And then to like defend the possibility of a guy coming off a torn Achilles tendon with a terrible offensive line as just like, well, he's a Hall of Famer, he'll figure it out. It's almost like Saleh had checked out of the interview and wasn't really paying attention. Like, I don't even.
Well, I don't know. I'd say those ESPN radio interviews have been tough on him because he had to I plead the fifth thing about Zach Wilson a while back. So I would say
he also gets paid for those, I think, though, right? Like,
yeah, I imagine that's why he does that. I imagine that's why he does them. So a paid hit is, I feel like how we should reference the Rodgers on Pat McAfee too, frankly. But yeah, I imagine that because of all the noise around Saleh right now and his job security, that he probably wants Rodgers out there so he can be like, see, look, we're good with a good quarterback. Like I'm fairly certain that he probably wants Rodgers to play. I don't know how much power he has in this situation. I know that Rodgers, if he has his druthers, will play, but will the Jets step in? Will Rodgers people step in? That's the big question. But yeah, my takeaway from that was that, like, all the things you said, but also that Saleh wants him to play, I think, and he doesn't really know how to say it. So, because he's been trying to, for a while, he was like doing the whole, he sacrificed so much for us. We're so happy that he's coming back. We cross that bridge when it gets there. Then it's gone to like where he tries to avoid answering it at all now. So we'll see. I mean, tomorrow is going to be the big day, obviously, if he's activated and he starts practicing fully, and then he'd have to talk to us. So yeah, that's pretty much the only
That's
thing to
enough
look
to
forward
keep him
to.
from coming back right there, is having to talk to you guys.
No, just Connor. Yeah.
I feel like Saleh it's a different point. Like, he's gone through a series of saying, bad comments in press conferences. We'll never forget the receipts, that comment, like that'll stay with him forever. But I think through all that, he's always also to a degree come across, I think, as confident. And this comment does not sound confident in any
I would
way.
say lately, I don't think he's come across very confident in general. I would say, especially because the criticism's been pretty harsh. And so when he comes out, especially in his Monday morning press conferences with us, or Monday afternoon, I should say, I think his tone has been a lot more dour than historically it has been. Even when they've been losing, he usually put on a good face. And I think I think coaching the Jets has aged him as it would anybody, is what I would say.
They say being president ages you like 20 years over 4 years. And like, I wonder what the equation is for coaching the Jets.
Point. Yeah. I mean, I saw 2 photos.
Luckily, he had no hair when he took the job. So
I was just saying. I saw 2 photos of him on Twitter, side to side. It was like when he was hired and now where he has like this beard, and I'm sure the photo they chose was purposely not like the most flattering necessarily, but it was like the difference is that he looked so much younger back then.
Yeah. All right. Did we have we covered it all here, Zach?
I believe
I guess
so.
What are you most looking at this week leading up to the game? Like, what are the key? And we'll get into it. We'll be back on Friday to preview the Commanders game. But like, what are the key bumps along the way here this week that you're looking at?
I mean, it's mainly just the Rodgers thing, frankly, at this point, and I guess the quotes coming out of the locker room. I imagine there won't be many. It's gotten emptier and emptier when we're in there. I'm sure that's on purpose. But yeah, like what the noise is coming out of this team and their motivation this week. And, they'll probably say all the right things, but until we see it on Sunday, like and we'll talk about this more on Friday, and maybe we'll try and get a guest of some sort. But this Sunday game, I think, is going to decide in a lot of ways, like if the jobs are safe or not. And if they can come out and look good, then I think they can feel better about going into next year, but I'm not confident right now.
One question just came in the chat from Scott Matranga. Genuine question. Do other teams' GMs speak to the media more often than Douglas does? I think the answer is no, right? Like, it's a genuine,
I think more,
yeah,
I'd say more of them speak as much as Douglas does. And then frankly, it is an issue because not an issue, and I get why they do it, because it makes the head coach take all the bullets. And I think that's why people are always asking why Joe doesn't talk. But I covered the Giants. Dave Gettleman was the same way. But if you cover a team like the Cowboys and you have the owner and GM talking to you every week, I saw John Schneider, I think, talk to reporters like this recently for the Seahawks. So there's some teams where they talk more often, but yeah, Joe Douglas is before the season, trade deadline, end of the season, and then the like owners meetings, combine, draft.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree that like a lot of teams, and then some teams, obviously it's a similar, like the Patriots, when you're talking to Belichick, you're talking to both, right? The head coach and the guy that's really making the personnel decisions.
Yeah.
So there are teams like that as well. But it's not unusual, I would say, to answer your question, Scott, to have GMs not talk much. All right. I think that's going to do it for us. Back to the beginning and the question we had, we do feel for the fans, man. It stinks. But we're going to keep coming to you. We'll be back on Friday. We'll talk about the Commanders and what to look forward to in that game, what maybe Trevor Siemian can bring to this team that he doesn't. It's an opportunity for him to actually start a game maybe, which is interesting. But with all that, we'll also have a guest on. It won't be Dane Brugler yet, although we're getting close to Dane time for sure. And we can't wait to talk to everybody again on the Can't Wait podcast coming up on Friday. See you guys.